Well, happy to introduce you to a newer friend of ours, Eliza Blank. Eliza is a terrific example of entrepreneurism, of grittiness, of bootstrapping. And we wrestled, Michaela and I, Michaela, my producer today, co-hosting with me, we call this segment Plants to Produce or Purpose Over Profit. But we ran out of peas, so we're just going to say we're pleased
Oh, thank you.
to have you with us today, Eliza. Yours is a great story. I've known of you for quite some time now. You're a formidable entrepreneur. Tell us the story of what you did before the Sill that
Before
got you
before the Sill.
before the Sill that got you into
Yeah.
this gritty mood where you said, "I can do anything."
Yeah. Well, I think actually the key to that is that I didn't do much before the Sill. I was so young. I went to, yeah, oh thank you. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. I went to school for communications and I started my career in brand strategy. And I actually worked for an agency, a creative agency doing brand strategy back in the aughts, before brand was like as ubiquitous as it is today. And that was actually an incredible entry point into the work that I do even today now. I ended up going client side, as they say, to a CPG company called Living Proof. I worked in hair care for a small stint doing brand marketing there. Yeah, so I did a little bit of hair care and then I left to start the Sill and the hair care company Living Proof. Most people probably know it to be this big company owned by Unilever, sold in Sephora, but it was started as a startup, and that was really where I got my entrepreneurial chops.
Oh, good for you. And Michaela Barker's been with the team now for about a year and a half, and she is normally the producer and wrangler for this podcast and among other responsibilities. But I asked her to join today because
And now
Michaela is an entrepreneur on her own too. She moonlights. She has a side gig, as seems like everyone does now.
both.
But yes, Michaela and I met Eliza when she was up at the Yale School of Management. I have a friend who invites me up there once a year, and lo and behold, I came back with a goodie bag, and in that goodie bag was Michaela Barker.
And he hasn't returned me yet.
Yeah,
So we're
what a
still
good
going
find.
strong.
Good for you. That's great.
So you're in hair care. You're at an entrepreneurial company acquired by a big
Mhm.
company. You learned a lot of lessons along the way there. Tell us the decision making that you went through to say, plants are what I'm going to tackle. I'm going to do it in cool old Brooklyn, and I'm going
Mhm.
to and I have some decisions to make. Do I try and bootstrap this company? Do I
Yeah,
try and raise capital? And as Michaela pointed out when we were chatting about you earlier, you waited 5 years before you went for
yeah,
outside capital.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, in fact, the Sill was an idea I had while I was still in school. So I mentioned I started at a creative agency and I started at the creative agency as an intern. So I was still in school. And that was when I first had the idea of creating a consumer brand around plants. And what I was able to realize or recognize is I didn't know what I didn't know. So even though I had the idea for the Sill when I was likely 21, it wasn't until I was 26 until I started it. And the decision making between the two ages was around getting some experience and really understanding how to put together a business plan that was operational, not just a brand concept or, a great looking mood board, but what would actually day one look like? What would year one look like? What were the things that I needed to achieve and what would success look like for me? Because quitting your day job is no, is no,
It's a big deal.
yeah, yeah, it is. It is. And I also think 26 was a good age for me because I had just enough of a professional track record to say, all right, if this didn't work out, here I am. I have a resume. I've spent time at real organizations. I can go get a job if this doesn't work out. But all this time, too, I couldn't let go of the idea. And I think that's also such a critical component to how I came to start because at that point, it was like 5 years. I was sitting on this idea. I couldn't believe no one else was going after it in the way that I envisioned. And so finally, I was like, you know what? I have the toolbox now. I can't shake this idea. it got to a point where I felt like I couldn't not do it. I couldn't not try and explore it.
Now, in the times that we get to chat with younger audiences, like Michaela's class at the Yale School of Management, lots of questions about when you make decisions, taking the entrepreneurial plunge. And I always bring up that the other choices you make in life in terms of finding a life partner, starting a family, all of those have real ramifications about your flexibility and pliability. What was your status when you decided to start the Sill?
That's a great question, and I think doesn't get asked enough, because I do think some of this bootstrapping entrepreneurial storytelling doesn't hit on the fact that oftentimes we're in these privileged positions where we say, okay, I can make a leap because in fact I have this safety net.
Yes.
And I was lucky enough to have met my husband already. So my husband and I, we've been together almost 20 years already, because I met him when I was 21.
Mm-hmm.
And it was because of that, in part. We were already living together when I was 26. And I had convinced him to go down to City Hall and become domestic partners, which was a deal that I don't even know if he really understood. But I was like, this is what's going to get me on your health insurance. Like, you don't need to get me a ring. I just want health insurance.
Such a pragmatist.
Yeah. And so obviously that
Will you
was,
take me to be your other person named on your insurance policy?
yeah, exactly. So romantic. In fact, I think someone at City Hall was like, do you guys want to just get married? And we were like, nope, no, thank you. Which we did 2 years later. But it is a good question, because I do feel like I'd also gotten to a point where I had this partnership in place. And, we had sort of this unspoken deal where it was like, okay, I'm going to put this hat on now, and like down the line, which happens to be true, like he'll put that hat on later. And now he's the entrepreneur in the family. But he supported me for over a decade building the Sill.
Which you mentioned going to school, but you haven't credited the school, which I'm sure is very proud to call you an alum.
I hope so. Well, I went to NYU, so I was one of many. But I credit NYU in many ways, I think, because they were real proponents of just making us citizens of the world. And I was interning and working from the moment I joined the university. So internships were a really big part of our education. And it happened to be a point in time where there were really great institutions bringing us on and giving us real responsibility. And so I mentioned the agency that I worked for. I was actually initially an intern, and that was a great entryway to just getting your feet in the door.
Eliza, I'm really curious. As you were building out the Sill and even as you were exiting, how did you manage the different relationships that you had with mentors, with your friends and family? Because something that I've gotten a lot as a fellow entrepreneur and as I'm building my company, Matcha Scrubs, are these people coming to me saying, as you're trying to balance so many different things, being a good friend, being a good domestic partner or wife, given the time frame of all of this, how do you do it? Because a lot of people will say that their relationships suffer, especially while they're in that beginning startup mode.
Yeah, no, it does take sacrifice. There's no question. I mean, had I not already had met my partner, Steve, I don't know that I would have had time to date. Like, that was pure luck. I mean, that really put me on a path that was more sustainable for me, because I had not only already found that person who was going to play a role in all of this from a support standpoint, but like someone to come home to and like, unleash, the entrepreneurial energy on. But for me, actually, what I would say is, because I was so young starting my organization, I was coming out of school, I managed to actually just like make other founder friends. Like, that was my community. And it was because I needed people who I could talk shop with, and I needed people to understand me. And if you were just climbing the corporate ladder, you and I would not have had a lot to talk about. I needed to have other founders around me. And it happens that part of the reason why I also became a founder was that my brother is an entrepreneur and my cousins are entrepreneurs. And there's a lot of that in and around me. And so what I can say is I didn't make a lot of friends for about a decade outside of work, but it afforded me the opportunity to meet really amazing, interesting people who are going to support me, not just personally, but also professionally. And And I also managed to squeeze out 2 babies in that time that I was running the Sill. So like you figure it out. Like you know, there's trade-offs, of course. I don't think I slept a lot. I still don't sleep a lot, but it was all more than worth it.
Eliza, when you mentioned that you guys met and married young, and I did as well. And I used to point that out to people, saying that one of the motivations for me starting a business, not never thinking myself as an entrepreneur at that point, was that we started a family. Marilyn and I married very young. We started a family very young, and I used to feel like that was not a good idea for her or for my kids, because I really didn't have anything. But Michaela and I, Lisa, we all had a chance to meet and get to know Dr. Arthur Brooks, who's a professor at Harvard. As he's known as the professor of happiness, and he's a wonderful guy. And I read everything he writes, and he changed my mind on how I think about that in an instant, because of the way he framed it. And he said, look, people are waiting into their 30s and 40s. And we talked about the kids in his class at the MBA program at Harvard, and what a small percentage, particularly of the Americans, are married, and they're in their late 20s, early to mid 30s, some even older. And he thought that was a mistake. His point was this: if you are lucky enough to meet someone that you feel is going to be the life companion you want, why would you deny yourself the opportunity of enjoying those years as soon as you're there, instead of making believe that this other world is so much better and livelier, and you don't want to ruin your good years by marrying too young? And I'm sure I'm not giving him justice, but he changed the frame for me in terms of how I think about my life decisions, which were not actually deliberate, but more happenstance kind of decisions. But I said, that makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel very lucky to have found Steve at the age that I did. I wasn't, with intention. I wasn't like 21 years old thinking I'm going to go get myself married. And in fact, in many ways, we did wait. It's funny because in retrospect, I know that I was 28 when I got married, and at the time I thought I was so old, and now I look back and I'm like, I was so young. But I was 21 when we met. I was 28 when we got married, and then we didn't have our first child until I was 33. So in fact, we've been together for 20 years, but we took our time in some ways, but it was deliberate.
All of your adult life.
We have been together my whole adult life, and we were able to then incorporate things like our career ambitions and our family planning and buying a home and all of these things. It did afford us the ability to plan in such a way that I don't think you necessarily have if you are waiting to do all these things later, because then
Yes.
of course we have this great sense of urgency. It felt like we had all the time in the world, in fact, because we had met so young. But of course that's happenstance, and you can't force that either. But I tend to agree with you. I think so much of our happiness today is built on a foundation that started many, many, many years ago.
Yes. So Dr. George Everly is a co-author of Lodestar, of which Jim also wrote, and he does a lot in the realm of resilience, psychology, self-improvement. And when it comes to work-life balance, he actually says that it's more about work-life integration and making sure that the two blend, and instead of trying to separate the two and just put one down and go fully into the other. And I find that that is something that always comes up within the realm of entrepreneurship. So as you were building out the Sill, and as you were even preparing to exit, how did you merge those two and see all of these components in your day-to-day life where you find lessons that are applicable to what you're doing?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. I don't quite frankly understand the idea of keeping them separate, because of course
That's
we
only if you
all,
work for the big XYZ corporation.
yeah, like I love my work. I love my work building the Sill. I love my work today. I enjoy just this weekend, I carved out 2 hours where my husband was going to take the kids out so that I could work on this presentation that I was going to give this week. And I did have this moment where I'm like, should I really be spending my Sunday doing this? But I wanted to. Like, I actually was enjoying the work that I was doing. And then of course I felt so much more prepared on Tuesday to give the presentation. And then, yesterday I found myself really wanting to get in some exercise. I got on a Peloton while I was on a call with my COO. It's like, look, this is life. Like let's all just find ways to enjoy it. And if we don't feel like we're trying to cram our workday into 9 to 5, it actually becomes a little bit more pleasurable. Like I really think we can then find ways to incorporate all the things we like into any given hour. We don't have to think about the timing. Even my stack of books right now, I have some fiction that I enjoy to read, but I'm really enjoying reading about food insecurity space right now, and around food systems, and around the Farm Bill, if you find yourself wanting to get fancy. And like I'm there at the breakfast table, with my highlighter.
I'm gonna go pick up a copy of that Farm Bill. It sounds like great reading.
It is actually quite fascinating. And I will say, like, that I will reach for that on the weekend. That's work, I guess, but like I enjoy my work, so why separate it?
Break out the barbecue and get fired up for a season full of mouth-watering meals. Stock up on gourmet grillers and round out the spread with delicious desserts. Make summer sizzle.
It's fulfilling to you and it fills that need. And speaking of the amazing work that you are doing, you have FarmLink, which has an amazing mission to help with food insecurity. And Jim is also the founder and the chairman of Smile Farms, that focuses on helping adults with developmental disabilities create working opportunities, specifically in the agriculture and hospitality space. So I'm really curious, and I would also love to hear from Jim, of course, but what was that like, shifting from entrepreneurship into a more purpose-filled mission and organization? And was that a hard shift, or did it come natural to you?
Yeah. It's funny now that you say this, I'm like, wow, I'm like a little Jim 2.0 maybe. Doing so many of the things.
Much prettier. And a lot more hair.
But you did used to have an afro, Jim. I've seen pictures.
Oh, wow.
I know you used to have an afro.
Don't out me there,
You're
please.
going to have to post those photos on social.
It's not happening.
Oh, that's too much. So, great question. I just found myself at FarmLink this past September. So I've been here now for 6 months. I was still in a leadership position at the Sill, though I had relinquished my seat as CEO, and we had made a transition to a new group of owners. And
how's the Sill doing now?
Great. Good. I mean, plants are eternal, aren't they? Like,
Yep.
Everybody still needs plants, especially now.
And how clever of you to arrange for COVID to give yourself that extra boost of business.
Yeah.
She's a great businesswoman, Jim. She knew how to time the market.
It was all planned. It was all planned. Yeah. Well, so it's interesting. So this organization, FarmLink, was actually born out of COVID, and it was a grassroots movement started by a bunch of college students who saw very clearly that our very vulnerable food system was starting to fail us. And if you can imagine, during COVID, farmers have effectively two outlets for their food. They have the hospitality industry, like hotels and restaurants and schools, and then they have grocery retail. But everything turned off overnight. And so all of a sudden, all these farmers were plowing under perfectly good food because they had no outlet for it. And in the meantime, you have more people in need waiting in hours-long lines in pantries. And so this was all over the news, and the founders of FarmLink saw this and refused to sit on the sidelines. So they literally started cold calling farmers and renting U-Haul trucks and just going to pick up this food and move it into the charitable food system. And now we do that at scale. And they had approached me when I was still at the Sill. I was not looking for a new role. I was not interviewing. I wasn't even thinking about the nonprofit space. And I immediately fell in love with this group. And I knew that I wanted to be a part of it, because just like the Sill, it is so tangible, and it is so meaningful to be bringing the surplus produce into people's lives. We have 48 million food insecure people in this country, and we have 35 billion pounds of food that goes to waste. That's just produce, and that's before it gets to stores for any number of reasons. I have a team in Idaho right now rescuing potatoes. I mean, it's wild, the work that we are doing. And these...
Give us a little color on that, Eliza. I didn't know until we chatted not too long ago how much food waste, good food, that goes to waste out there. And then for you to come in with a little bit of organizational skills, a little bit of a lot of logistics knowledge, some money, that you say, I can help both ends of this problem.
Yeah. So there's food waste everywhere in our country. Like 40% of our food goes to waste, and that's across the board, across the supply chain.
40%.
I mean, that's like going to the grocery store, buying 10 bags of groceries, and then immediately throwing 4 out. So that's
Wow.
what happens all across the supply chain, including the consumer's home, which we all know we throw out a lot of food. But what is lesser known is what happens before it gets to the store and at the farm and wholesale and distributor level. So what we're doing right now in the case of Idaho is our country happens to have a potato surplus right now. And potato farmers grow potatoes for a very certain specific spec for grocery stores. It has to be certain size, certain quality, and usually a off-spec potato, too small, too large, will go into processing. But when there's a surplus nationwide and
Go into processing. What does that mean?
dehydrated, freeze-dried, turned into something like an ingredient, um,
Animal feed?
animal feed for sure. These things are, secondary and tertiary markets for these potato farmers. But right now we are in a glut, and it happens to be impacting us even in an export market. Europe happens to also have a potato surplus right now. And so
Let me
there's
guess. We
10
all we all have heard about the beef shortage, but I didn't know there was a
the surplus.
potato
This
surplus.
happens in every single commodity every single day. So right now, in the case of potatoes in the northwest of our country, there's over 10 million pounds of surplus potatoes just sitting there. And of course, we know that there's 48 million people who are food insecure. And so oftentimes what happens is there's a mismatch. We know that there's effectively unlimited supply, there's unlimited demand, but there's no one in the middle mile to connect that supply to the demand. And that's what FarmLink does. So we hold relationships with food donors who could be farmers, they can be wholesalers, they can be distributors. We hold relationships with the charitable food system, so food pantries, banks, independent nonprofits, and we can match them, which happens quickly because the food is perishable, of course. And we actually coordinate and pay for the transportation of that food. So we move the food from wherever it occurs, wherever the surplus occurs, to wherever the need is in the fastest way, in the most efficient way possible. And this year, we'll have moved 150 million pounds of food this way.
Wow. So there's got to be a lot of technology involved here.
You would think we are just starting to adopt more technology now, but because it's so relationship based and because the capacity of the charitable system is so volatile, as you can imagine, one week they are full, the next week they are not full. Sometimes they have cold storage, sometimes they don't have cold storage. It's so nuanced. It has been historically very difficult to apply technology to this type of system, but we are now in an era where we can do that. And there have been great institutions that have created two-way marketplaces. What we do is less about having a two-way marketplace and more about understanding how to match the supply with the demand in the exact moment that it occurs and not waiting for people to come to a marketplace and find it and bid on it and sort it out. There's great reason for that to exist in many cases, especially with shelf-stable food. In the case of produce, we move much faster than that.
Yeah, it sounds like you all are making great advancements. And I'm curious, in terms of the technology that you're hoping to adopt, is there any place for AI within that to help streamline, any partnerships that you do have? Are you able to pull data about the needs that they have met, or is that something that you're continuing to explore?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. When I say, historically it's one story, today is a whole nother story. It's actually a very exciting time to be in the charitable space, period, because of the advancements in technology, because now of course we can apply a lot of this for good causes. And a lot of this is just a logistics problem. I like to say that food insecurity itself is not a logistics issue. We are also here at FarmLink trying to address root causes of hunger. But to get food from point A to point B, certainly, technology can help with that. And that's really exciting.
Eliza, we always comment here that just because people are in the not-for-profit world doesn't mean they're not great entrepreneurs, great business leaders, or business people in general. What have you found in your 6 months in the not-for-profit world about the people you come across and their skill sets?
I mean, the wealth of knowledge that's here is remarkable. And the size of just sort of like the nonprofit industry is enormous. And I think I didn't really fully appreciate that either, is that not only is it representative of a big part of the economy, but tremendously smart, talented, people with great operational depth. And so that's been exciting. I've been on a soapbox since I got here saying, everyone come on over, because like there are so many great problems to be solving, very tangible ones with such great payoff. That doesn't just all show up on the cap table. Like to actually be a steward of an organization and to build it in a way that you are singularly focused on solving the problem in the best way that you can, not in the best way for so many different stakeholders, is quite freeing. It's actually an amazing place to be as an entrepreneur.
I love that one.
What's the same and what's different about doing a startup in the for-profit world and the work that you're doing at FarmLink in the not-for-profit world?
Well, here's what I'll say. When you're raising money for a nonprofit, you are telling people exactly what you're doing, and they are signing up out of likelihood the goodness of their heart and the connection they feel to the cause. There's no real transaction there, and I think there's something uniquely beautiful about that. In the for-profit world, of course, you're promising a return, and that's fine too. And you get a lot of gratification actually as an entrepreneur and being able to provide that return. But it does muddy things a little bit, right? Because you have to satisfy your customer, but you also have to satisfy your investor, your stakeholder. And then sometimes those things can be at odds, whereas I'm exclusively thinking about, my customer. And I'm finding those donors who feel as aligned with us as an organization to do what's best for that customer as well.
Thank you so much for that story and that insight. And something that you made me think of while you were talking through that was, what was it like raising so much capital for the Sill and then eventually transitioning into a different role? Jim also recently, he loves to say he fired himself as CEO of 100 Flowers. So you both have gone through a pivot, but it seems like you are also still very involved in the sustainability space. Jim is very involved within the company and Smile Farms as well. But what was that pivot like transitioning over? And did you find that you were reinventing yourself or that you had more time to do more passion projects?
It really feels like the most natural extension. I feel like everything I've done with the Sill was leading up to this moment, to be able to deploy everything that I learned into this organization in this moment in time. Because here I am with like a very odd mix of skills and in perishable good logistics and scaling a business and scaling a team and raising money. And now I can do that at FarmLink. So in fact, I don't think it's been a hard pivot. I think it's been like a soft pivot. And it's only been met with like, oh wow, this is so great. Like, there's been no sort of disappointment. I feel like I'm past the honeymoon period and I'm still just like so incredibly energized. And it's incredible the opportunity to learn about a new space in the in a framework where you can apply that knowledge right away. I was a good student, but I'm a better entrepreneur because I learn by doing. And so I want to be able to read the book and then have the conversation with the right people at the right time and deploy that knowledge immediately. And I happen to be at a nonprofit that is also very entrepreneurial. And so, we like to be nimble and experimental and innovative. And that's what is so exciting. And so to me, it's no pivot at all. In fact, I said this before, in some ways it's like more freeing to be doing work here in a nonprofit setting than it is in a for-profit setting.
Tell us about the talent side of things. Attracting talent, you mentioned how it's hard to have friends outside of business in your first 10 years at the Sill because it was all consuming. And when you weren't all consumed by the business, you were starting a family and having a family. And so there was not a lot of, hey, I'm going to go get my nails done and meet some new people for coffee. But in attracting talent, you were attracting talent who were attracted to A, needed a job, maybe B, felt your passion and the mission there, and saw an economic opportunity. How about attracting talent into the not-for-profit world? How is that different? Where do you lean into more in terms of the buttons that you might push on for a talent prospect?
That's an interesting question. We haven't done a ton of hiring since I've joined yet. But what I will say is we're entering an interesting job market. I don't know what else to say because I don't know what the insight is yet, but I feel in a way it's leveled the playing field because you have so a lot of the founders from my organization FarmLink, they started this as students, and it is hard to imagine what it must be like to have graduated into this era. I think there's still a lot of conventional paths that people can take in this moment, but like we're seeing the writing on the wall right now. Organizations are really adopting technology and we're seeing the ramifications of that. So in a way, I feel like in this moment, people are pursuing more things that they are interested in, as opposed to a classical career path, because the career paths are kind of unknown right now. And so I think it's opened the talent pool a little bit. I think you also have an older generation who's just actually burnt out post COVID.
Uh, Michaela will tell you that it's a pet interest of ours for our team that we're looking at this changing landscape in the job market very closely. And I may bombard her with 3 or 4 or 5 articles a day about how it's changing. And we're friendly with Chip Cutter, the editor at the Wall Street Journal, whose field this is. This is his research area, and he writes about it often. But we see it in our world every day that there are people who graduated graduated from college last May and are really struggling to get an interview to find a job. It's those entry level jobs that seem to be most impacted early on. And that's interesting how that dynamic is playing to your strengths because people want to make a difference. They want to have a job. They want to begin to learn. They want to get their career started. And that, so the challenge on the for profit side of the world may be beneficial to those on the not for profit side of the world.
Something that I'm really curious about as well is you both are formally educated, but I feel like in my experience and with other entrepreneurs that I talk to, no formal education truly prepares you for exactly how to run a business. So what are some of the biggest learning lessons or some of the surprises that you've had as a startup founder?
You have to work on yourself, actually. That was maybe like one of the things, even now as I think about that question, and reflect very quickly on my experience. Like everything is learnable, right? And so if you like to learn and you like to do and you're not afraid of not failing, but like making mistakes. Like I had to be the CFO of my company for 18 months. Like I learned it and I actually really enjoyed it. And I've always been like okay with math, but like I wasn't like building financial models, but now I know how to. So like there's always a learn by doing, and that is all very, like I said, learnable. I think the real challenge with building an organization is people, of course. And if you're going to be a good manager of people, you really need to understand yourself. You need to understand your own values. You need to understand your own blind spots. You need to understand how you show up in the world that might be actually quite different from how you think you show up in the world. And you sort of have to humble yourself. Like I think my advantage now coming into this organization at 40 is that I am able to reflect on who I was and what I want to bring into this new chapter and what I very much want to leave behind. So a lot of what I'm doing is just kind of practicing on myself now versus the business.
When you built the Sill, part of your skill set was being a storyteller, painting a picture of what your dream was and how that might manifest itself, ergo as a for-profit, make money opportunity for your investors. What role is there for storytelling and dream shaping in the not-for-profit world that you're in now? How important is that skill set that you honed and developed when you built the Sill?
Yeah, exceptionally important. I mean, I think part of the success of this organization was the fact that its founding members were such good storytellers. Not only were they good storytellers, they were so representative of hope, right? Because this is a young group of kids who chose to get involved in what seemed like an unfixable problem and started, instead of complaining about it, started actually building solutions. And so being able to tell that story is really compelling. And then I think telling just a vision or sharing a vision of our world in the future is also critically important to getting our audiences to understand why they would back us, why they would support our work, why our work is even bigger than what it is that we do today. I mean, I'd like to believe that one day we can feed people without charity. And that's a weird thing to say as a charity, right? Like we are working towards our own obsolescence. And, you know, you would never say that as a for-profit company. You would never say, one day I hope I'm obsolete. That is precisely the message that we are sharing at FarmLink. And so to your question, I think storytelling is tremendously important. It's a great skill that, you know, hopefully I've honed over the years, because, you know, we are trying to solve a challenging and almost insurmountable problem here at FarmLink. And you have to be able to paint a picture for people to get it. Even as we talked about potatoes, people can't understand what 35 billion pounds means. So you have to be able to tell the story about the potato farmer who couldn't sell his off-market potatoes because they're too big. And, you know, we are able to tell that, you know, here on podcasts, we're able to storytell through video. We just have so many mediums now that we can share these stories, but storytelling has always been a favorite of mine, and a great way to convey who you are and what you stand for.
You know, I've never thought that farming was easy. I always assumed it was very hard, but listening to you, it sounds really, really hard.
Yeah. And I mean, I think any farmer in America would tell you that. I mean, we hit a point in time, many times in history, where the retail price of the commodities are under the cost of inputs. I mean, what? Like, how can we live? You know, that's and hence me reading about the Farm Bill. So yeah, and it's actually quite tragic what's happening in our country on the farming side. And what FarmLink stands to do is help fix the system that serves both the farmers and the people that they feed. I mean, it's the same broken system. And so that's why we approach it from both angles.
But you had some exposure to the agricultural business, Michaela, and I wonder if you realized how hard it was.
So during my time at OSU, we actually did have in some of our classes where we were able to go and look at various farms and gardens and setups. And even though I was around agriculture and farms, I also didn't know not only how much effort and time it took, but how much research and science was really a part of everything. How you can't grow basil next to these types of plants because the basil will strangle it and take all of the nutrients. There's so much that just goes into it, even with the livestock that are there and all of those things. So it's a really delicate balance from what I've learned. And of course, you know so much more than I do about this. But as we're talking about entrepreneurship and learning and a willingness to learn so many different things, were there any learnings that you found during that process, either of working with these farms and working with the farmers, that you saw so applicable to your own life and that people should be more aware of?
Well, I'll answer it two ways. Well, the first thing I'll say is not only are farmers scientists, they're economists, and they are very skilled economists because, as you can imagine, they are planning their harvests like years in advance. They need to know exactly what to plan for. And the funny thing is, and this is how I'll bridge it to your question, is they're plants. You know, you can have a sunny year and like your crop explodes, right? So oftentimes it's like, well, why is all there surplus? And it's like, well, it was sunny last year. It's nobody's fault, right? Like the pear yield this year was 30% up year over year because of weather. And so I think the lesson here that I take away from farmers or from running a plant business is just we're all part of nature, right? And we're all resilient for that very reason. And we're also at the whim of much bigger systems. Um, and at the end of the day, I think we all just want to grow. So I don't know. Maybe that's like a plant pun and not really yeah, applicable to the farmer. But I do think there is something about plants and there's something about farmers that just speaks to the resiliency that you need to have in entrepreneurship. You just have to show up every day, see what you got to work with, and work through it. Because like it's never going to be a perfect day. And but if that excites you, then you're like off to the races.
Eliza, you're a great role model. You're still a little tiny baby, but uh, you're going to accomplish so much more in your life. We look forward to staying connected, learning from you, and celebrating your successes, which I'm sure will be many on your journey. So thanks for being so generous with your time today. Michaela and I I know I speak for her, enjoyed our conversation, and we look forward to more.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Michaela. This was wonderful.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.